Okay, thanks for coming for Minot, by the way. Appreciate you coming out here, and we're trying to offer you our hospitality. You just missed if you weren't here a couple weeks ago, we had our big Hoose Festival, and for many of you, I know that means lutefisk and lefse, and we might even have some for you for lunch if you're of that appetite. First of all, I wanted to give a shout out to your organization's newsletter. It is the best. If you want to try to stay up to speed on what's happening in the industry, this is the place you go to. And I read it all the time, and what I really like about it is the links to the comments, because your people go to the meetings, attend the meetings, record what's being said, and if the reader wants more information, there's the ability to get the links, and I really appreciate that, and I know a lot of legislators appreciate that newsletter because it's a way to stay informed when you can't be there. So let's talk a little bit about the session. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about constitutional measure number 4, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about it because it casts such a long shadow on preparations for the 2025 session and what we would do if the measure passes. And I know the previous panel did, and Senator Beckedahl did as well. But I keep going back to a comment that Governor Burgum said a couple months ago publicly, and he said he has a constitutional obligation to prepare a budget for the 2025 session, and he said we're preparing 2 different budgets, one depending on which presidential candidate gets elected. Well, in our preparations for the 2025 session, we're preparing initiatives and a budget based on whether Measure 4 passes. So it's a tale of 2 different budgets depending on this measure. Senator Beckedahl already reviewed with you that it's approximately a $3.15 billion price tag. That's the revenue we, as a state legislature, will be constitutionally required to replace, and we will do so if necessary. And so just a couple things I wanted to point out for you in terms of how would we going about doing that? Why are you focused on Measure 4? Well, because of the amount, $3.15 billion, where do you get it all? You can't get it from any single one source. It's just too much money. So it has to be through a combination of budget cuts, new taxes, reductions in other payments to political subdivisions, and I know Senator Beckedahl has talked about those, but that's got to be part of the equation as well. And the spend from the rainy day funds, the Budget Stabilization Fund, the Legacy Fund, the SIF Fund, Strategic Investment and Infrastructure Fund, and the Common Schools Trust Fund. All of those can play a role and will have to play a role. But as Senator Beckedahl pointed out, they have limited purposes for which they can be used. So it's not as though we have as much discretion as we would otherwise like if we were trying to fill a pothole the size of $3.15 billion. I just wanted to throw out some numbers, and I know one of them is a little bit different than what you've seen previously, but try to update these numbers. So if we were talking about tax increases to fill that void, there's what a 1 cent increase in our sales tax would do. It's $484 million. Realistically, we'd have to go all of 2 cents, because that will get us not quite to $1 billion, but you certainly need to replace at least $1 billion of that $3 billion with new tax revenues, and we would likely do that. Modest increases in other taxes, like the corporate tax, 10%, that only gets you $38 million. But again, you have to start filling in the puzzle somewhere. The motor fuels tax, 10%, a 10-cent gallon increase on that would yield us about $134 million in revenue, and we'd probably do that. We haven't increased that tax since 2006, and we've been using legacy fund earnings to sort of supplement our transportation funds. But we would probably do that. A 10% increase in individual income tax is about $87 million. We've given some previous sales tax exemptions. We would probably go back and eliminate those. That yields about $65 million. All of those, of course, don't come up to $1.15 billion, but I wanted to give you some idea of our planning in terms of what we would do if the measure does pass, because all of these taxes would be, in my opinion, would be increased. I mentioned reductions to what we provide to political subdivisions, and that's obviously something that has to be on the table. Senator Beckedahl mentioned our state aid distribution fund. That's our sales tax revenue that the state gives back to the political subs. That's $243 million. So if we cut that 10%, that's only $24.3 million. If we cut hub city funding, Minot's a hub city, Dickinson's a hub city, Williston's a hub city. If we cut those 10%, that only produces $9.8 million. Not a lot when you're trying to do $3.15 billion. Prairie dog funding, again, that's $230 to the cities and counties. That 10% cut is $23 million. One I know you're interested in, and this number, I'm not sure why my number is different than Senator Beckedahl's, but I've got that total production down at $512 million, so that a 10% cut is $51.2 million. We'd probably have to do all of these and a little more, just because as you're seeing, as you do 10% cuts, which are significant cuts, you're still a long ways from achieving what you need to achieve under Measure 4. So I provide these numbers just to give you a sense of where things would have to go in terms of new tax increases, budget cuts to the general fund, and taking some of the money that we give to political subdivisions currently back. There's the one on the general fund. You probably could do that math because it's approximately a $6 billion general fund budget. So you cut 5%, you only get $305 million, and a 5% cut to our general fund is a significant cut. Okay, let's start talking about some other issues. I said Measure 4 does cast a long shadow, but there are other issues. And the first one that I'm acutely aware of, because in leadership you start to figure out where people can serve and where they're qualified to serve and what strengths they bring to the legislature. And what I've come to realize, and what will continue in the 2025 session, is that we have a lot of turnover going on right now, and I don't fully understand why, but it's happening. And of course, it's going to continue to happen with term limits. So last session, we had 12 of 47 senators that were brand new, 25% turnover. This session, we will have a minimum of 6 new senators. Senator Beckedahl chairs Senate Appropriations. A full 1/3 of his committee is gone from last session. So part of the task, certainly in Senator Beckedahl's position, is educating and mentoring, because it's a complex job, and most importantly, it's a part-time job. So the time to get up to speed and to be competent in what you're doing is not a long runway. And so part of what we will focus on is education and mentoring. So I mentioned the turnover in the past 2 sessions, and the term limits haven't even kicked in. But with term limits, the minimum amount of turnover will be 25%. And I say minimum because by Constitution, you have to have that, because you can serve up to 8 years. But if you factor in the fact that individuals, and we've had some this time, are not going to seek re-election, resign and move away, get beat, I suspect you'll have a turnover rate of approximately 1/3 legislators per election cycle after term limits fully kick in. So, to me, that tells me that we do need to do some long-range planning, and we are going to have a restructuring of our Legislative Council. Legislative Council is the legislative branch of government's full-time employees that serve the legislature in the interim and in the full-time. And the restructuring that we're going to do is we're going to add more people. There's just no way around that. We don't have what I call policy analysts. We have, for 100 years, relied on the expertise of our legislators, not on internal full-time employees to do that. We don't have that anymore. We won't have that. All other states have what they call policy analysts, somebody a legislator can go to advise them on what other states are doing, what good policy is. What we currently have in the legislature now is we have fiscal analysts. They're the ones that count the money. And we have lawyers. They're the ones that will draft you the bills once you tell them what you want. And we have an IT staff. We have nobody advising on policy issues. So that's going to be part of the restructuring, I believe. As you would expect, another important issue in the upcoming session will be energy. It'll be, and for the indefinite future, it'll always be a dominant question. You've heard a lot about the CO2 pipeline. I'm sure there will be more pipeline bills, and they will be bills to limit the ability of the pipeline to come into North Dakota. We'll deal with those bills, I'm sure. I hope we'll have a nuclear energy study. I've said as part of the Interim Energy Development and Transmission Committee that it's time for North Dakota to at least study it and to consider whether it has a place in our energy production. And so I think that'll be part of the mix in the 2025 session. Property tax. Regardless of whether Measure 4 passes or fails, property tax reform will be center stage. This slide is one I need to update. I said there's 42 bills being drafted related to property tax reform. Many of them are duplicative, but it's actually 44 because I've learned of a couple more that are in the hopper, and it's another thing that's overwhelmed our permanent staff. They're accustomed to working full-time and some weekends during the legislative session when we're going pretty robustly for 80 days, but it's turned into, it's kind of like the National Guard, Brad. It used to be a weekend a month and a couple weeks in the summer. It's not that way anymore. It's a much more rigorous battle rhythm, and that's the same for our Legislative Council. It's not regular session. They're working weekends, they're working late because of the volume of bill drafts. I know we're going to see another run at reducing individual income tax, and I would say that's going to come up every time because we're going to have surpluses again. And when we have surpluses, there's legislators who would like to reduce taxes, there's legislators who would like to spend some of it, and there's legislators who would want to invest some of it, and we'll do all three of those. Social issue bill volume. Last session, there are members of the media who suggested we had too many social bills, and they too were duplicative. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but I will tell you this. From my experience in talking to candidates, in talking to people who've either recently run or intending to run, this is why they decide to run. It's not for some fiscal issue. It's social issues, and we'll have a lot of them because it's important to them and it's important to their constituents. And so I expect that we're going to have a lot. We will have issues related to abortion. We always have. It's not, I don't feel like it's going to change. The Dobbs decision that was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court shifted the debate squarely to the states, but that's going to continue. In terms of forecasting, I predict the debate is going to turn to the abortion pill and not the clinics. We don't have any in North Dakota. Nobody's seeking to set up shop in North Dakota to perform abortions. So that's, to me, where the shift is going to be. You see those red states. North Dakota is among those states. We currently ban the abortion pill. And so we're part of I wouldn't say we're part of a minority. You can see the country's pretty evenly divided on that one. But that will be an important issue in the upcoming session. Gun bills, I feel very safe in forecasting that we will have gun bills. We've always had those, and but I think the issue, one of the issues that we've been dealing with and will be confronted with sometime when we arrive in session is the North Dakota Supreme Court has a bill before it to decide whether the state overstepped its authority in telling political subdivisions like the city of Fargo that you have to be able to sell guns out of your home. The city of Fargo has had a local ordinance that says you can only sell guns where we permit you to sell guns. And a number of legislators don't like that. So we did pass a law, and the governor did sign it, that says you can sell guns in your home, notwithstanding what a city says in their zoning ordinance. So we'll have that issue squarely before us again, and we'll have other gun bills as well. New state buildings and infrastructure. There's a lot of that. And again, when I say we have surpluses, yes, some folks want tax reductions, but there's also projects that are long overdue and need to be funded. At the top of the list is the new state hospital in Jamestown. That is an extraordinarily expensive infrastructure project for us. The most recent estimates are between $350 and $400 million. I don't know whether we'll fund it, but we'll get pushed from a lot of different sides on that one. There are legislators who do not agree with the scope and the footprint of that new state hospital. Others that suggest that it's where it needs to be. And still others say that the price tag is too high. So that will be an important debate that we'll have. The Veterans Service Member addition to the Heritage Center, that one is over budget, but I think it's likely to be funded. It will be attached to the Heritage Center as part of that project on the Capitol grounds. So you'll see that as a major infrastructure project. There'll be some higher education structures, although I'm told not as many. Airport renovation and expansion. We have a lot of airports making requests. Some are wants, some are needs. Certainly Dickinson's is a need. Grand Forks has a runway issue. That's a need. So I expect those will be major items of debate and discussion about funding some local infrastructure. Senator Beckedahl mentioned the legacy fund streaming bill. You know how the revenue that comes off of the legacy fund, we have a bill that allocates those dollars, and I don't expect that to change. There's over $100 million that goes right into bond payments. We shore up, as I mentioned earlier, our highway funding, and we provide tax relief. And I expect those all to stay the same, even as the amount of revenue coming off of the legacy fund increases. SIF has got a very large unobligated balance. It'll come in at $1.5 billion. And there'll be a lot of individuals that will want to spend that money one way or another. And I suspect we'll spend some of it. but I don't think we'll spend anywhere close to what everybody would like to spend. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have that, but again, there's specific statutory reasons for that fund, just like there is for our budget stabilization fund, and so that amount will be allocated, and that will be a source of major discussions in the legislature. That's all I have to present on that. Happy to try to answer any questions. I know some folks are.
Shane predicted that Kelly Armstrong would be our next governor. Talk about your relationship with Kelly.
Oh, okay. The question from Jeff is, there's a bold prediction that Congressman Kelly Armstrong would be our next governor. Talk about my relationship.
Or the Senate.
Okay. Well, I can tell you I've served with Congressman Armstrong in the North Dakota Senate for 3 sessions. Our first 2 sessions, I served as chairman of Judiciary. He was the vice chairman. And I thought we did some of the best work that's been done as far as my career, because he had this expertise in criminal law. I had expertise in civil law. And, you know, there's about 60 or 70 bills that go through Judiciary. And it was just a good example of where citizen legislators come to the legislature, have that organic expertise, and can help draft good legislation. And so that's what we did. So I think I've got a great relationship. He's a friend. He's a hunting friend. And I hope after the session he'll still want to invite me to go hunting once in a while. But And just to follow up on that, we have had some dialogue, informal, of course, because things are quite fluid in terms of whether he'll be elected or not. But it's kind of like planning for the Measure 4. You don't know whether it's going to pass or not, but because it's so important, you have to plan for it. And with Congressman Armstrong, I know he's been planning for that because, man, you get elected on November 5th, you assume the office on December 15th, and all of a sudden you've got a budget that you have to prepare for 2 weeks later. So both candidates are well advised to be preparing for January 5th. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you ever possibly see, because of all the changes, you know, finance, fiscal responsibility, just the demand on you guys as legislators, do you ever see it going to an annual session?
Great question. The question is based on the demands of the professional and other demands of legislators. Do you ever see it going into an annual session? And I would say the answer is yes. It's more likely now than it has been in recent sessions. I've always been an opponent of annual sessions because I support the concept of a citizen legislature where we have a full-time regular job, and we do this legislating in, you know, every other year as a part-time gig. But I think it's changing. I think it's changing. I'll get to go back from this meeting. I'll get to go back to my regular job, but again, the demands are so different when you're turning over between 25 and 40% of your legislators every session. It's just it requires that you have a better, a more robust staff to support you, and frankly, it's going to require some initiation where you try to inform yourself about the issues you'll confront as you come into a session. Yes, sir. Bill.
Senator, in both this meeting and by the media, there's been a lot of comments that Measure 4 passes. We as a legislature won't have any time to deal with the 6+ areas of bills that you talked about. What's your thought on that?
Won't have time to deal with what? I didn't hear the last part of it.
The other bills that you said are forthcoming, whether it's a gun bill or otherwise, they'll just be kind of scrapped. What's your opinion?
I believe the question is, if Measure 4 passes, we as a legislature will be preoccupied with trying to deal with that and won't have time to focus on other important issues. And I think in one sense that's certainly true, because again, it's as I mentioned at the outset, it overshadows everything else. But for example, in my conversations with Congressman Armstrong, he's talked about just extending the session, and we could do that. The governor, we could adjourn sine die out of our regular session, and he could call us right back in to finish our work. I tend to think that we'd probably, we might pass a one-year budget and just do that, and not try to come up with $3 billion. Maybe we try to come up with $1.5 billion, and then go to work in the interim and try to figure it out. So I would say that's partially true. Any more questions?
Senator?
Yes.
So in order to deal with some of the backlog at Legislative Council, as well as some of these time issues or whatnot, has anybody talked about maybe further reducing the amount of bills per legislator that could be reduced, somewhat reduce some of that?
We've had, thank you for the question. The question is, in view of the new demands on staff, has there been discussion about reducing the number of bills that could be introduced during a legislative session? And yes, there have been. I myself support it. There are others that do not. We actually had a bill to do that, and the bill was defeated. But the idea is, if four legislators are focused on the same issue and they're asking for bill drafts on the same issues, can't they cooperate with one another? And the Legislative Council gives them that opportunity, but they don't always want to do that. So I think as part of this legislative reform, I think that limitations like that certainly are going to be presented. I'm going to support them because one of the things that drives me crazy is we get so many bills in so many committees, and we get all of this busy work. We don't always focus on the important ones. We don't always get them right, and that's bothersome to me. I'll give you an example. The primary residence tax credit, $500 tax credit. We were focused on income tax, and that committee was super busy. But one of the things we missed was that a lot of people in North Dakota they live in their home, but they put the ownership of the home in trust. And so our tax commissioner ruled that they do not get that $500 credit. Well, that's just, that type of oversight, I would hope is something that we wouldn't always miss out on. And so probably the first bill we're going to pass in 2025 is to make it clear that if you live in your home and it happens to be titled in a trust rather than in your name individually, that you still get that $500 property tax credit.